What happened 3 weeks ago in the Red Sea represents the single most consequential shift in naval warfare since the aircraft carrier made the battleship obsolete in 1942. A technology demonstration occurred that defense analysts in Washington are still trying to process, and the implications are so severe that the Pentagon has classified the full after-action report at the highest levels. This is not hyperbole. This is structural analysis of a weapons revolution that invalidates 80 years of American naval dominance. The Western intelligence community has known about drone swarm technology for years, but what they did not anticipate was how quickly adversaries would operationalize it at scale, how cheaply it could be deployed, and how completely it negates the defensive systems that America has spent hundreds of billions of dollars perfecting. Let me be very clear about what we are discussing tonight. We are watching the end of the era of the supercarrier as the dominant instrument of power projection. We are witnessing the obsolescence of the entire American blue water Navy as currently configured. And the countries that recognize this shift earliest are not America's allies. 3 questions will structure everything that follows. And by the end of this analysis, you will understand why naval strategists at the Pentagon are quietly panicking while publicly maintaining confidence. First, what exactly is drone swarm technology, and why does it represent a paradigm shift rather than incremental improvement? Second, how did Iran, Yemen, and China develop operational capabilities that American defense contractors said would take another decade? And third, what does a world look like where aircraft carriers are floating targets rather than instruments of dominance? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but understanding the structural forces at work is the only rational response to what is unfolding. Let me start with the technical reality that changes everything about naval warfare. A drone swarm is not simply multiple drones operating simultaneously. It is a network system where dozens or hundreds of autonomous aerial vehicles communicate with each other in real time, make collective decisions without human input, and adapt their attack patterns based on defensive responses. Think of it as a single distributed intelligence rather than individual machines. The technology operates on 3 critical layers. The communication layer allows drones to share targeting data, coordinate approach vectors, and redistribute attack responsibilities if individual units are destroyed. The decision layer uses artificial intelligence to identify highest value targets, calculate optimal attack sequences, and modify tactics in milliseconds based on battlefield conditions. The execution layer delivers payloads with precision while overwhelming defensive systems through sheer numerical advantage and unpredictable approach patterns. Here is what makes this revolution so catastrophic for traditional naval power. A single aircraft carrier strike group represents approximately $30 billion in assets. The carrier itself costs $13 billion. The 4 to 6 escort vessels cost another $8 to $12 billion. The aircraft wing represents $5 to $7 billion in hardware. The total package includes roughly 7,500 personnel and the most sophisticated defensive systems American technology can produce. Now consider the economics of the swarm. Each individual drone costs between $20,000 and $50,000 depending on configuration. A coordinated swarm of 300 drones represents $6 to $15 million in total cost. The cost ratio is 2,000 to 1 in favor of the attacker. This is not a fight that America can win through attrition. This is not a military challenge that can be solved by spending more money. This is a structural problem where the fundamental economics of naval warfare have inverted. The defensive mathematics are even more severe. American carrier groups rely on layered air defense, including Standard missiles, evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, rolling airframe missiles, and close-in weapon systems. Each Standard missile costs between $2 million and $4 million. Each evolved Sea Sparrow costs $1.2 million. Each rolling airframe missile costs roughly $1 million. The close-in weapon systems use ammunition that costs approximately $30 per round, but the radar guidance and mechanical systems require time to acquire targets, rotate gun mounts, and engage. Against a conventional air attack involving dozens of aircraft or missiles, these defensive systems are extraordinarily effective. The problem is that they were designed for a different kind of warfare. A coordinated swarm attack involving 300 drones arriving from multiple vectors simultaneously cannot be defeated by current defensive architecture. The radar systems can track them, the computers can prioritize targets, but the physics of magazine depth, engagement time, and reload cycles create an insurmountable problem. Let me walk through exactly what happens when a carrier group faces a coordinated swarm attack. The defensive engagement begins when long-range radar detects the incoming swarm at approximately 100 to 150 kilometers distance. Standard missiles launch first, targeting high-priority threats. Each engagement takes roughly 90 seconds from target lock to impact assessment. The magazine depth on a single Aegis cruiser is 96 vertical launch cells. Assume 70 cells loaded with standard missiles. That provides 70 engagement opportunities before the magazine is exhausted. Now the swarm is at 50 kilometers. Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles engage with quad-packed cells, providing additional capacity. This adds perhaps 150 additional engagement opportunities across the strike group. Call it 220 total interceptions so far. The swarm is now at 20 kilometers and the rolling airframe missiles activate. These are point defense systems with magazines of 21 missiles per launcher. Multiple launchers across the strike group provide another 100 potential interceptions. Total interceptions, 320. The problem is that you started with 300 drones and the mathematics of engagement success rates. If defensive systems achieve 90% successful interception, which would be extraordinarily high under real combat conditions with electronic warfare and chaff deployment, that still means 30 drones penetrate the defensive envelope. If success rates drop to 80% under degraded conditions, 60 drones penetrate. At 70% success rates, 90 drones reach terminal attack range. And here is where the catastrophe becomes unavoidable. The close-in weapon systems represent the final defensive layer, with phalanx or CRAM systems engaging at less than 2 kilometers. These systems have engagement windows measured in seconds against targets approaching at 200 to 400 kilometers per hour. Even if these systems perform perfectly, destroying 2/3 of remaining threats, that leaves 10 to 30 drones delivering payloads against the carrier or high-value escorts. A single drone carrying a 40-kilogram warhead can disable critical radar systems, damage flight deck operations, or destroy exposed aircraft. Multiple impacts create compounding failures as damage control teams attempt to manage fires, equipment failures, and casualty response simultaneously. 10 successful impacts would likely render a carrier non-operational. 30 impacts could result in catastrophic loss. This brings us to the question that defense analysts cannot answer satisfactorily. How did Iran, Yemen, and China develop operational drone swarm capabilities that American intelligence assessments said would not exist until 2030 or later? The answer reveals everything about how technological development works when adversaries are incentivized to solve specific problems rather than maximize contractor profits. Iran has been preparing for asymmetric naval warfare against American carrier groups for 25 years. This is not an exaggeration, and it is not propaganda. After the Iranian Revolution in 1979, Iran recognized that it could never compete with American naval power through conventional means. The strategic question became how to deny American carriers the ability to operate in the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters without building an expensive blue water navy that would simply be destroyed in conventional engagement. The answer was what military strategists call anti-access area denial, implemented through missiles, mines, small boat swarms, and increasingly sophisticated unmanned systems. Iran invested billions of dollars over decades in developing indigenous drone technology, starting with reverse-engineered American and Israeli systems and progressing to fully domestic designs. By 2020, Iran was producing thousands of drones annually across multiple classes, including reconnaissance, loitering munitions, and explosive payloads. The swarm coordination breakthrough came from artificial intelligence research that Iran conducted in partnership with China and Russia. The algorithms that allow hundreds of drones to communicate and coordinate attacks are not actually that complex from a computer science perspective. The challenge is integration with navigation systems, target recognition, and robust communication protocols that resist jamming. Iran solved these problems through iterative development and extensive testing against mock defensive systems. Yemen provided the testing ground where theory became operational reality. The Houthis, supported by Iranian technical assistance, conducted hundreds of drone and missile attacks against Saudi Arabia between 2015 and 2022. These attacks evolved from crude harassment to sophisticated strikes against oil infrastructure, airports, and military installations. The Saudi defensive response, using American Patriot systems and other advanced technology, provided detailed feedback about how Western air defense systems respond to saturation attacks. Every attack generated data. Every defensive response revealed reaction times, engagement priorities, and system limitations. This data fed back into Iranian development programs, allowing iterative improvements to swarm coordination algorithms, approach vectors, and electronic warfare capabilities. By 2023, Yemen was conducting attacks using dozens of drones simultaneously, overwhelming Saudi defenses despite billions of dollars in American military support. China approached the problem from a different direction, but arrived at the same destination. Chinese military strategists studied American carrier vulnerabilities as part of their broader anti-access strategy in the Western Pacific. They recognized that denying American carriers the ability to operate within the first island chain would fundamentally alter the regional balance of power. Drone swarms represented an asymmetric solution where China's advantages in manufacturing scale and AI development could be weaponized against America's capital-intensive naval architecture. Chinese defense companies are now producing military drones at scales that American analysts find difficult to comprehend. We are talking about production capacities of tens of thousands of units annually, with costs driven down through mass production and supply chain optimization. A swarm of 300 drones represents less than 1 day's production capacity for major Chinese manufacturers. The implications for any naval conflict in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea are severe. Now we need to examine what this technological shift means for American naval strategy and the broader architecture of global power projection. This is where the analysis becomes uncomfortable because the structural implications cannot be resolved through incremental improvements or increased defense spending. The United States Navy operates 11 aircraft carriers, 43 to 45 guided missile cruisers and destroyers configured for carrier escort and various support vessels. This fleet represents the foundation of American ability to project power globally. Carriers allow the United States to position strike aircraft within range of any coastal region, providing leverage in conflicts from the Persian Gulf to the Taiwan Strait to the Mediterranean. The entire strategic logic of the carrier strike group assumes that it can operate in contested waters while defending itself against air and missile threats. If that assumption breaks down, the strategic calculus that has governed American foreign policy since 1945 collapses. Let me be very specific about what I mean. American influence in the Middle East rests substantially on the ability to position carriers in the Persian Gulf or Mediterranean and credibly threaten military action. American security commitments to Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea assume that carrier groups can operate in the Western Pacific despite Chinese opposition. American intervention capability in Europe or Africa depends on naval aviation providing strike capabilities that continental basing cannot match. If drone swarm technology makes it impossible for carriers to operate in contested environments without unacceptable loss risk, then all of these strategic assumptions require fundamental revision. And here is the critical point that defense planners cannot publicly acknowledge. The technology to defend against coordinated swarm attacks at acceptable cost does not currently exist, and it is not clear that it can exist given the underlying economics. Consider the potential defensive solutions. You could attempt to shoot down more drones by adding more interceptor missiles, but this runs directly into magazine depth limitations and cost economics that cannot be solved. You could develop directed energy weapons like lasers that have effectively unlimited magazines, but current laser systems lack the power output to engage multiple fast-moving targets simultaneously at the required ranges. You could deploy your own defensive drone swarms to intercept attacking drones, but this creates a technological race where the attacker maintains economic advantage. Or you could fundamentally rethink naval architecture away from capital ships toward distributed systems. But this would require scrapping hundreds of billions in existing assets and rebuilding the fleet around completely different operational concepts. The institutional resistance to this conclusion is immense because it invalidates the entire career structure of current naval leadership and the business models of major defense contractors. Let me give you the historical parallel that keeps appearing in my analysis, because we have seen this pattern before and we know how it ends. In the 1920s and 1930s, naval strategists debated whether aircraft carriers would replace battleships as the dominant naval platform. The battleship admirals argued that heavily armored capital ships with massive guns represented the peak of naval technology. They pointed to centuries of naval tradition and billions in existing investments. The carrier advocates argued that aircraft extended striking range far beyond what gun-based ships could achieve, and that no amount of armor could protect against aerial bombardment. They were correct, but the institutional resistance was fierce. It took Pearl Harbor and the Pacific War to definitively prove that the battleship era was over. Within 3 years, battleships had been relegated to shore bombardment and escort roles, while carriers became the centerpiece of naval strategy. We are living through the same transition right now, except the technology making carriers obsolete is drone swarms rather than carrier-based aircraft. The evidence is available for anyone willing to examine it honestly. The economics are irrefutable. The operational demonstrations in Yemen and the Red Sea have provided proof of concept. Yet, the institutional response is to commission more carriers, develop incremental defensive improvements, and maintain public confidence in capabilities that sophisticated adversaries no longer fear. History shows us what happens to empires that continue investing in obsolete military technology while adversaries develop asymmetric counters. The French built the Maginot Line while Germany developed Blitzkrieg doctrine. The Soviet Union built massive tank armies while the United States developed precision-guided munitions and air superiority. Britain maintained the world's largest navy while air power made surface fleets vulnerable without air cover. In each case, the side that recognized the technological shift earliest gained decisive advantage. Now, let me walk through the scenario that keeps Pentagon strategists awake at night, because understanding the operational implications makes the strategic problem undeniable. Imagine a crisis scenario in the Taiwan Strait where China moves to blockade or invade Taiwan. The United States positions 2 or 3 carrier strike groups in the Western Pacific to demonstrate resolve and provide strike capabilities. This represents standard American crisis response. China does not attempt to sink the carriers through conventional anti-ship missiles, which would trigger immediate escalation and full American military response. Instead, China conducts sustained harassment using drone swarms launched from coastal bases, artificial islands, and merchant vessels. Each attack involves 200 to 400 drones coordinated to penetrate defensive envelopes. The carrier groups successfully defend against the first attack, expending significant portions of their missile magazines. The second attack arrives 8 hours later, more missiles expended. The third attack arrives 12 hours after that. Now the strike groups face a critical decision. They can withdraw to replenish magazines at bases in Japan or Guam, which means abandoning their strategic position. Or they can remain on station with degraded defensive capability, accepting increasing risk of successful drone penetration. If they withdraw, China has achieved anti-access without firing a shot at the carriers directly. American credibility to defend Taiwan collapses because the fleet cannot maintain presence in contested waters. If they remain, each subsequent attack has higher probability of inflicting damage that would force withdrawal anyway. Either way, the fundamental mission fails. The cost economics make this scenario even more catastrophic. China's cost to conduct 10 swarm attacks involving 300 drones each is roughly $60 to $150 million total. America's cost to defend against those attacks, including missile expenditure and operational tempo, exceeds $2 billion. And this assumes no successful hits, no battle damage, and no loss of personnel or equipment. China can sustain this exchange rate indefinitely. America cannot. Let me now address the question that necessarily follows. If American naval dominance is ending due to drone swarm technology, what does the global order look like in 5 to 10 years? This is where structural analysis becomes predictive. And I want to be very careful to distinguish between what is likely based on current trends versus what is certain. The most probable scenario involves regional powers developing indigenous drone swarm capabilities and using them to deny American naval access to their coastal waters. Iran will continue developing capabilities that make carrier operations in the Persian Gulf unacceptably risky. China will achieve effective anti-access in the first island chain, fundamentally altering the strategic balance regarding Taiwan. North Korea will develop swarm capabilities that increase the risks of any American naval buildup near the peninsula. This represents a world where American power projection capability declines substantially while American security commitments remain unchanged. The gap between commitments and capabilities creates instability as adversaries test whether American red lines are credible and allies question whether American guarantees are reliable. This is a classic security dilemma where declining hegemonic power creates transition instability. The second-order effects cascade through economic and political systems. If American carriers cannot reliably operate in the Persian Gulf, American influence over Middle Eastern oil flows decreases. If carriers cannot operate in the Western Pacific, American ability to defend Taiwan becomes questionable, and Japanese and South Korean confidence in American security guarantees erodes. If naval power projection becomes unreliable globally, American ability to enforce sanctions, conduct interventions, or respond to crises diminishes. These are not small changes. These are foundational shifts in how global power operates. And the timeline for these shifts is compressed because the technology is already operational and proliferating rapidly. We are not talking about theoretical future capabilities. We are talking about systems that exist right now and are being deployed by multiple actors. Let me be very direct about the prediction I am making based on this analysis, because predictions create accountability, and I want to be held to what I am claiming. Within 5 years, there will be a major incident where an American carrier strike group either suffers significant damage from a drone swarm attack or is forced to withdraw from a crisis region due to swarm threat. This incident will force public acknowledgement of the vulnerability that defense planners currently discuss only in classified settings. Within 10 years, the United States will begin fundamental restructuring of its naval force away from carrier-centric architecture toward distributed platforms and unmanned systems. This restructuring will be painful, expensive, and will occur under crisis conditions rather than through deliberate planning. The transition will weaken American global position during the period when old capabilities are phased out before new capabilities are fully operational. These predictions might be wrong. The technology might not proliferate as rapidly as current trends suggest. Defensive countermeasures might prove more effective than current testing indicates. Political factors might prevent adversaries from employing capabilities they possess. But the structural forces point toward the scenario I have outlined, and betting against technological disruption when the economics and operational evidence align, this clearly would be foolish. Now, let me address what I know some of you are thinking, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the strongest counter-arguments to the analysis I have presented. The defense establishment would argue that I am underestimating American technological adaptability, overestimating adversary capabilities, and ignoring classified defensive systems that would change the equation. These are reasonable objections, and I want to take them seriously. American defense technology has historically maintained qualitative advantages that offset quantitative disadvantages. Classified systems exist that the public does not know about and that might provide capabilities beyond what open source analysis can assess. Adversary capabilities demonstrated in limited testing might not scale to full operational deployment. I acknowledge these possibilities while maintaining that the fundamental analysis remains sound. Even accounting for classified American capabilities, the cost economics of swarm attacks versus traditional air defense cannot be overcome through incremental improvements. Even assuming adversary capabilities are less advanced than demonstrated, the trend lines point toward rapid improvement and proliferation. Even granting American technological advantages, the physics of magazine depth and engagement time create hard limits that cannot be solved without fundamental architectural changes. The structural analysis is not based on assuming American weakness or adversary strength. It is based on examining the underlying economics and physics of offensive drone swarms versus defensive interceptor systems. Those fundamentals favor the attacker regardless of which country possesses which capabilities. Let me close by returning to the framework that drives all of this analysis, because what we are witnessing is not primarily a story about technology. It is a story about empire, overextension, and the recurring patterns that determine which powers rise and which fall throughout history. Every dominant empire eventually encounters the same trap. The very capabilities that enable dominance become economic burdens that cannot be sustained when adversaries develop asymmetric counters. Britain dominated global trade through the world's largest navy. That navy became unsustainable when aircraft carriers and submarines made surface fleets vulnerable while maintenance costs consumed increasing portions of British GDP. Rome dominated the Mediterranean through its legions. Those legions became unsustainable when the empire expanded beyond defensible frontiers, and maintenance costs exceeded revenue from conquered territories. The pattern repeats because the underlying dynamics are structural rather than unique to specific technologies or empires. America built global dominance on carrier strike groups that could project power anywhere on Earth. Those carriers are becoming unsustainable as drone swarm technology inverts the economics of naval warfare, while maintenance of global presence consumes resources needed for economic competitiveness. The specifics differ, but the pattern is identical.